A little girl cried, "They're killing my mom." Hong Kong. A rainy autumn evening in 1972. The city was alive the way only Hong Kong can be alive at night. Neon lights covered every building, every shopfront, every narrow alleyway. Red, blue, gold. All of it reflected across the wet streets below, turning puddles into rivers of color. Steam drifted up from noodle shops on every corner. Taxi horns echoed between buildings. Street vendors wrestled with their umbrellas trying to protect their carts. Businessmen in expensive suits moved quickly through the crowds with their heads down. For most people, it was just another rainy night in the city. For one family, it would become the night they never stopped talking about for the rest of their lives. Inside one of Hong Kong's most elegant restaurants, the world felt completely different from the street outside. Soft piano music filled the room. Crystal chandeliers cast warm golden light across white tablecloths. Wealthy businessmen laughed over contracts worth more money than most people in Hong Kong would ever see in a lifetime. Foreign tourists raised glasses of expensive wine. Famous faces sat tucked behind polished wooden partitions, enjoying the kind of privacy that money can buy. Near the back of the restaurant, away from all of it, a man sat alone at a small table. He wore a simple black Chinese shirt, no jewelry, no bodyguards standing nearby, no attempt to signal to anyone in the room that he was someone worth noticing. He lifted his chopsticks quietly and continued eating his dinner. Every movement was calm. Every breath was steady. The waitress who had served him earlier passed by and smiled. "Everything all right, Mr. Lee?" Bruce Lee looked up and returned the smile without any performance behind it. "The food is wonderful. Would you like anything else?" He shook his head gently. "This is perfect, thank you." That was who he was when nobody was watching. The same man as when everyone was watching. No difference between the two. A few tables away, a group of young tourists glanced in his direction. One leaned toward his friend and whispered. His friend looked over carefully, then looked back. "Should we ask for an autograph?" The first tourist shook his head. "Let him eat." Bruce Lee noticed them looking. He did not pretend otherwise. He simply nodded once in their direction. They smiled back. The moment passed quietly, the way Bruce Lee preferred most moments to pass. Chapter 2. Outside the restaurant, only a few hundred feet away, the peace of that evening did not exist. A young woman moved quickly along the rain-soaked sidewalk. Her name was Lin Mei. She was 28 years old and she was raising her daughter alone. Every evening she worked late cleaning offices in the business district before making the long walk home through whatever weather the city threw at her. Her shoes had been resoled twice. Her coat was older than her daughter. Inside her bag was a small paycheck and just enough money to cover groceries for the next few days. She was not dreaming about becoming wealthy. She was not hoping for a better apartment or nicer clothes. She only wanted to make it home before her little girl fell asleep. Beside her, holding her hand with both of hers, walked 6-year-old May. The little girl skipped through puddles as though the rain were there specifically for her amusement. She tilted her face upward and let the drops fall across her nose. She laughed at something only she found funny. "Mummy, can we make dumplings tomorrow?" Lin Mei smiled, despite the exhaustion that had settled into every part of her body. "Only if you help me." May giggled. "I'll help eat them." Her mother laughed. "I expected that." For just a moment, the long hours did not matter. The wet shoes did not matter. The thin coat did not matter. Nothing mattered except the sound of a little girl laughing beside her mother in the rain. Then 3 men stepped out of a dark alley. They moved the way men move when they have been drinking, and they are looking for a reason to feel powerful. Their clothes were untidy. Their eyes searched everything around them. The tallest one stepped directly into the middle of the sidewalk and blocked the path forward. Lin Mei tightened her grip on May's hand immediately. "Please, we are just trying to get home." The man smiled in a way that had nothing warm in it. "So are we." His friends laughed. Another stepped closer. No need to rush. You should smile more. Lynn tried to move around them. The third man shifted and cut her off. Where exactly do you think you're going? May pressed herself against her mother's side. Her small fingers were trembling. Lynn kept her voice as steady as she could. Please, let us pass. The leader reached slowly for her wrist. We are only being friendly. She pulled back hard. I said no. Around them, people on the sidewalk had noticed what was happening. Some slowed their pace. Most looked away and kept walking. An elderly couple crossed quietly to the other side of the street. A businessman in a suit lowered his eyes and walked straight past without breaking his stride. Nobody wanted trouble. If you were walking past that night and you saw this happening, what would you have done? Drop your honest answer in the comments. I read every single one. The leader grabbed Lynn's arm much harder this time. You think you're too good for us. She shoved him back with everything she had. It was not a powerful push, but it landed somewhere far more sensitive than his body. It landed on his pride. His face changed instantly. Without a word, his hand swung across her face. The sound echoed through the wet street. Lynn crashed onto the pavement. May screamed. Mommy? The gang laughed. One man kicked her in the ribs. Another grabbed her bag and ripped it from her shoulder. Coins scattered across the sidewalk. Family photographs fell into puddles. A small stuffed rabbit tumbled from May's backpack and soaked through within seconds. Lynn curled herself up and wrapped her arms around her own head, trying to shield her face from the next blow. Please stop. Another punch landed. Blood mixed with the rainwater running across the concrete. May stood frozen behind a parked taxi. Every part of her wanted to run. Every part of her refused to leave her mother. Then one of the men looked directly at the little girl and pointed a finger straight at her. You better disappear, or you're next. Those words broke something loose inside her. May turned and ran. She ran through the pouring rain without knowing where she was going. She slipped on a wet curb and fell and got back up without stopping. Tears blurred everything in front of her. She could not think clearly. She could not see clearly. She only knew one thing. If she did not find help, her mother might not survive the night. Chapter 3. May sprinted past glowing shop windows, past crowded sidewalks, past strangers who barely noticed the terrified child racing through the storm. Nobody stopped. Nobody asked if she was all right. Nobody reached out a hand. Then ahead of her, through the rain, she saw bright golden lights, a restaurant, large wooden doors, warmth and light spilling out onto the wet street. She pushed through the doors without thinking. The warm room went silent the moment she stepped inside. Rainwater dripped from her tiny clothes onto the polished marble floor. Every guest in the restaurant turned to look at her. Some frowned, some sighed. One wealthy woman leaned toward her companion and whispered something. Another guest near the door complained loudly enough to be heard. The restaurant manager hurried forward. "My dear, are you lost?" May could not answer. She was crying too hard to form a single word. She looked around the room desperately, faces everywhere. Dozens of them. None of them meant anything to her. None of them looked the way she needed someone to look. Then, near the back corner of the restaurant, she saw him. A man sitting alone. Quiet, still, calm. Something in his eyes was different from every other face in that room. She ran straight toward him without hesitation and grabbed the sleeve of his shirt with both tiny hands. Her whole body shook as she fought to catch her breath. Through tears, through gasps, she pushed out the words that stopped every conversation in the restaurant at exactly the same moment. "Mister, please." She could barely get the rest out. "They're hurting my mommy. They're going to kill her." Every fork stopped moving. Every conversation died. Even the piano player slowly lifted his hands from the keys. Bruce Lee looked into the little girl's eyes. For one single heartbeat, everything in the room was completely still. Then, without saying a word, Bruce Lee placed his chopsticks quietly on the table. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice. He did not look around the room for someone else to handle it. The calm man who had been enjoying a quiet dinner simply disappeared. Something older and much stronger rose behind his eyes. He stood slowly, looked down at the frightened child in front of him, and asked only one question, softly, steadily. "Can you still show me where she is?" May nodded desperately. Bruce Lee reached into his pocket, placed several bills beneath his dinner plate, and turned toward the door. If this story is hitting you the way it is hitting me right now, subscribe to this channel. Every single week we bring you stories exactly like this one. Real courage, real character. Hit that button and never miss another one. The rain outside had grown even heavier, but neither of them noticed, because somewhere in the darkness of that city, a mother was still waiting for someone, anyone, to come before it was too late. Chapter 4. The rain had not stopped. It seemed as though the entire city had gone quiet, just to listen to the footsteps echoing through the narrow Hong Kong streets behind Bruce Lee and the little girl as they moved together through the dark. Water splashed beneath their feet. Neon lights reflected across the wet pavement like liquid fire. May's tiny hand clung to Bruce Lee's sleeve with everything she had. She could barely speak between sobs. "They're over there. Please hurry. Mommy can't get up." Bruce Lee never told her to calm down. He never promised everything would be fine. Instead, he simply said 2 words. "I'm here." Those 2 words carried more weight than any shout could have. Behind them, several restaurant guests had followed outside, not because they intended to help, because curiosity had always been easier than courage. One businessman whispered to his companion, "Isn't that Bruce Lee?" Another adjusted his glasses. "It is." A tourist quickly raised a camera. Someone laughed nervously. "Those men have knives. Even Bruce Lee can't fight 3 armed men alone." Bruce Lee heard every word. He kept walking. Fear had never been something he was a stranger to. He had simply learned long ago that fear was not something you obeyed. It was something you acknowledged and then moved past, because the person in front of you needed you to. May suddenly stopped. Her eyes went wide. "They're there." Bruce Lee looked ahead. Halfway down a narrow alley beneath a flickering street lamp, 3 men surrounded a woman lying against the wet pavement. Her face was bruised badly. One eye had nearly swollen shut. Blood ran across the concrete and mixed with the rainwater flowing toward the gutter. Her torn bag lay several feet away. Groceries were scattered everywhere. Broken eggs, crushed vegetables, a family photograph soaking through in a puddle near the wall. One of the men laughed as he kicked the groceries further into the street. Another grabbed Lynn by the hair and pulled her head up. "Look at you. You still think somebody's coming for you?" The leader crouched down beside her. "You embarrassed me. Now you're going to apologize." She spat blood onto the pavement. "I would rather die." His smile disappeared. He raised his fist slowly. Then May screamed, "Mom." The 3 men turned. Standing at the entrance of the alley, rain dripping from his black shirt, hands resting naturally at his sides, was Bruce Lee. He was not in a fighting stance. He was not trying to look intimidating. His breathing was slow and even. His eyes never left Lin May on the ground. Not once. The leader looked Bruce Lee up and down for a long moment, then laughed. "And who are you supposed to be?" Bruce Lee answered without any change in his voice. "The man giving you one opportunity to leave." The gang exploded with laughter. One of them pointed. "Listen to him. He thinks he's some kind of hero." Another reached into his jacket and pulled out a folding knife. The blade caught the light from the street lamp above. Several people watching from the alley entrance gasped. The businessman who had followed Bruce Lee quietly took 2 steps backward. Someone whispered that someone should call the police. Nobody moved. Bruce Lee took 1 slow step forward. "I will not ask again." The leader spread his arms wide. "Or what exactly?" Bruce Lee's voice remained perfectly steady. "Or you will spend the rest of your lives wishing you had listened the first time." The leader smiled one more time. Then he charged. Chapter 5. The punch came fast. Years of street fighting had given the leader a confidence that had served him well against ordinary men. His fist moved with real speed and real force behind it. Against Bruce Lee, it never had a chance. The instant the punch entered range, Bruce Lee was no longer standing where he had been standing. Not because he jumped back, because he stepped to the side at exactly the right moment, with exactly the right amount of movement. Nothing wasted. Nothing dramatic. A sharp crack echoed through the alley as Bruce Lee's open palm redirected the man's wrist. The punch changed direction completely. The momentum carried the leader stumbling past him. Before he could recover, Bruce Lee delivered a short, precise kick to the back of his thigh. Not his head, not his ribs, his thigh. The leg buckled. The man crashed face first into a puddle. The second attacker roared and came forward with the knife raised high. Bruce Lee stepped inside the attack before it fully developed. His left hand redirected the knife arm away from his body. His right elbow struck the man's shoulder with a sharp, controlled impact. The knife flew upward into the rain. Before it even finished its arc, Bruce Lee caught it, folded the blade closed with one hand, and set it on the ground behind him. The entire exchange lasted less than 2 seconds. The spectators at the alley entrance stared. Nobody cheered, nobody spoke, nobody could quite process what they had just seen. The third attacker had not moved. For the first time since the night began, something that looked very much like genuine fear appeared on his face. He looked at his 2 companions. One was face down in a puddle. The other was bent forward holding his shoulder. Bruce Lee looked directly at the third man. "You still have time. Walk away." The man shook his head, but it was the shake of someone trying to convince himself more than anyone else. "We're 3 against 1. Bruce Lee answered quietly. "No, you were." Then he moved. His speed was not wild, it was not reckless, it was not driven by anger. Every motion looked like the simplest possible solution to the problem in front of him. A straight lead stopped 1 inch from the man's nose. The man instinctively leaned back hard. Bruce Lee had not touched him. A quick, precise sweep sent his feet sliding across the rain-soaked pavement. He went down hard. Before the man could push himself back up, Bruce Lee's foot rested gently against his shoulder. Not pressing, not crushing, simply reminding him that the fight was already over. The leader had struggled back to his feet. His pride was hurting considerably more than his body. He reached behind a trash container and pulled out a short metal pipe. "You think you're better than us?" Bruce Lee turned slowly toward him. "No, I simply chose a different path." The man swung the pipe with everything he had. Bruce Lee stepped forward instead of backward. The pipe missed by inches. Bruce Lee trapped the swinging arm, applied a controlled twist, and the pipe clattered onto the wet pavement. 1 measured strike to the ribs, 1 firm push. The leader stumbled backward into the alley wall. His breath left him completely. His knees bent. He slid slowly down the wall and sat in the rain. Silence. Nobody moved. Even the city itself seemed to stop breathing for a moment. The restaurant guests stared with wide eyes. They had followed Bruce Lee into that alley expecting chaos. Instead, they had watched something that none of them had words for. Not 1 unnecessary strike. Not 1 blow delivered out of anger or revenge. Only enough force to stop the violence. Nothing more. Chapter 6. Bruce Lee looked around the alley. Lin Mei was still conscious. Barely. May ran to her mother and dropped to her knees. Tears streamed down both their faces as they held each other in the rain. Bruce Lee quietly knelt beside them. He removed his own jacket, folded it carefully, and placed it beneath Lynn's head. "Can you breathe?" She nodded weakly. Her eyes found May, then found Bruce Lee. "My daughter." Bruce Lee smiled gently. "She's safe." Lynn looked at him through swollen eyes. "You saved us." Bruce Lee shook his head. "No, your daughter saved you." He looked at May. She was brave enough to ask for help. Those words made several people standing at the alley entrance lower their heads. Because every adult standing in that alley had heard what was happening to this woman and her child, and every single one of them had chosen to keep walking. An elderly shopkeeper near the wall suddenly stepped forward. His voice shook when he spoke. "I saw everything. I closed my door. I told myself it was not my business." He looked at Lin May on the stretcher. "I was wrong." Another man stepped forward from the crowd. "So was I." Then another. "I heard her screaming. I kept walking." One by one, people admitted what they had done, or rather, what they had failed to do. Bruce Lee listened to each one without interrupting. Then he spoke. "The greatest victories are not won with fists. They are won when ordinary people decide that evil will not stand unchallenged in front of them." Nobody interrupted. The rain had softened now, almost gentle, as though the city itself had finally exhaled. Chapter 7. The first police car arrived less than a minute later. Blue and red lights washed across the rain-soaked alley walls. Officers rushed out with their hands near their holsters, expecting to find a violent street brawl still in progress. Instead, they found 3 battered men sitting quietly against the wall. Their weapons lay untouched on the wet pavement. A little girl held tightly to her injured mother, and standing calmly between all of them, in a rain-soaked black shirt with no jacket, was Bruce Lee. One young officer recognized him immediately. His eyes went wide. "Mr. Lee." Bruce Lee nodded politely. "They will need an ambulance first." No drama, no explanation, only concern for the woman still lying on the ground. The officers called for medical assistance immediately. Meanwhile, the restaurant guests who had followed Bruce Lee gathered slowly at the alley entrance. More pedestrians had stopped. Taxi drivers had left their cars to see what was happening. Shopkeepers stepped out from their doorways. Within minutes, dozens of people stood silently in the rain watching. News traveled fast in Hong Kong. Someone near the back whispered, "Bruce Lee stopped a gang by himself." Another replied, "He fought 3 armed men." An elderly fruit vendor standing near the wall shook his head slowly. "No, he protected someone. There is a difference." Bruce Lee walked toward the gang leader. The man instinctively tried to shift away, not because Bruce Lee looked angry, because he did not. The leader had spent his entire life understanding violent men. He knew exactly how angry men behaved. He had no experience with calm ones. Bruce Lee crouched down until they were at the same eye level. "What is your name?" The man hesitated. "How? How old are you, How?" 28. Bruce Lee nodded slowly. "Old enough to know better." How lowered his eyes. Bruce Lee continued in the same quiet voice. "When you attacked that woman tonight, what exactly did you win?" No answer. "Did you become stronger?" Silence. "Did you earn anyone's respect?" Nothing. "Did you become a better man?" How's jaw tightened. His lips pressed together. The answer was already sitting behind his eyes, and it was hurting him because he already knew it. Bruce Lee stood slowly. "You believed fear was power. It is not. It is borrowed. The moment someone stronger appears, it disappears completely." One of the younger gang members suddenly broke. He was the youngest of the 3. He could not have been older than 20. He covered his face with both hands, and his shoulders shook. I never wanted this. Even the police officers looked surprised. Even Howe stared at him. The young man shook his head. I only followed them. I didn't know it would go this far. Bruce Lee looked directly at him. The man who follows evil still chooses the road. The young man nodded through tears. I know. Chapter 8. The ambulance arrived. Paramedics moved quickly toward Lin Mei. Bruce Lee stepped aside to give them room. Mei refused to let go of his hand. One of the medics looked at the little girl gently. You can come with us. Mei shook her head without looking up. I don't want him to leave. Bruce Lee knelt beside her. What is your name? Mei. How old are you? Mei. 7. Bruce Lee smiled. You were very brave tonight. She looked down at the wet pavement. I was scared. Bruce Lee nodded. So was I. Mei blinked up at him. You were scared. Bruce Lee looked at her steadily. Being brave does not mean you are never afraid. It means someone else matters more than your fear. The little girl thought about that for a moment. Then she wrapped both arms around him with all the strength her small body had. Thank you. Bruce Lee placed a hand gently on her head. No child should ever have to rescue her own mother. That line. Tell me in the comments if that hit you the way it hit me. Those words moved through the crowd, the way a stone moves through still water, quietly, in every direction. Several people looked down at the pavement. Because every adult standing in that alley had heard what was happening to this woman and her child. And every single one of them had chosen to keep walking. An elderly shopkeeper near the wall suddenly stepped forward. His voice shook when he spoke. I saw everything. I closed my door. I told myself it was not my business. He looked at Lin Mei on the stretcher. I was wrong. Another man stepped forward from the crowd. So was I. Then another. I heard her screaming. I kept walking. Bruce Lee listened to each one without interrupting. Then he spoke. The greatest victories are not won with fists. They are won when ordinary people decide that evil will not stand unchallenged in front of them. The rain had softened now, almost gentle, as though the city itself had finally exhaled. Chapter 9. Howe stood up from against the wall. The officers moved toward him immediately. He raised both hands. I just need 1 minute, please. The officers looked at Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee gave a slight nod. They loosened their grip. Howe walked toward Lin Mei. Each step looked heavier than the last. When he finally reached her, he did not stop standing. He went all the way down to his knees on the wet pavement. Not because anyone forced him, because the shame had become too heavy to carry from a standing position. His voice barely came out. I am sorry. No excuses, no blaming the alcohol, no blaming his companions. Just 2 words. The other 2 men followed. Each one lowered his head before Lin Mei, then before little Mei. The little girl pressed herself behind Bruce Lee's arm, still frightened, still trembling. Bruce Lee looked at the 3 men. An apology begins with words, but it is only proven through actions. Howe looked up. We will pay every hospital bill. We will replace everything that was taken. We will accept whatever punishment comes. Bruce Lee answered quietly. I hope you do. But remember, prison can punish your body. Only you can change your character. The officers placed handcuffs on the men. None of them resisted as they were led toward the patrol cars. Howe turned around one final time at the entrance of the alley. Mr. Lee. Bruce Lee looked at him. Why didn't you hurt us more than you did? You could have. Bruce Lee's answer was quiet enough that only the people standing closest heard it. Because if I had enjoyed hurting people, I would have become exactly what I came here to stop. The alley went still again. Not because of fear, because every person standing there understood that they had witnessed something that had nothing to do with fighting. Chapter 10. The rain had stopped before sunrise. Hong Kong woke up slowly the next morning the way it always did. Street vendors rolled open their carts. Trams rattled along their tracks. Office workers moved through the early light toward another ordinary day. But nothing about this day felt ordinary. Before the sun had fully risen, the story had already spread across the city, not through newspapers, not through television, through people. A taxi driver told his first passenger of the morning. A waitress whispered it to the kitchen staff. Police officers repeated it at every station. By noon, nearly everyone in the district had heard the same story. A terrified little girl had walked into a crowded restaurant past dozens of wealthy adults. Every one of them had looked at her. Not one of them had moved. The only person who stood up without hesitation was Bruce Lee. The hospital room was quiet. May sat beside her mother's bed with a sheet of paper and some colored pencils, drawing flowers. Lynn had suffered bruised ribs, cuts across her face, and a fractured wrist. The doctors assured her she would recover completely. She watched her daughter drawing and heard her humming softly to herself and smiled for the first time since the attack. Then someone knocked gently on the open door. Bruce Lee stepped inside, carrying a small paper bag. No cameras, no reporters, no bodyguards. Just Bruce Lee. May looked up, and her face changed completely. "You came back." Bruce Lee smiled. "I told you your mother would be all right." He placed the paper bag on the bedside table. Inside were fresh oranges, a children's storybook, and a small wooden dragon carved by hand. Nothing expensive, only thoughtful. May pulled the little dragon out and held it against her chest with both arms. "I am going to keep him forever." Bruce Lee laughed softly. "Then he will remind you to be brave." Lynn tried to sit up straighter. "You already saved our lives. You did not have to come back." Bruce Lee pulled a chair close and sat down. "I was not checking on your injuries." She looked at him. "I came to see how your hearts were doing." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Lynn admitted quietly, "I keep asking myself something. What is it? What if May had not found you? What if she had asked someone else first, and they had turned her away?" Bruce Lee looked out the hospital window at the city below. "That is the question, but I think the better one is this. What if the first person she asked had helped her?" Silence settled over the room, because that was the question that should have been echoing across the entire city. Chapter 11. Inside the central police station, Howe and the other two men sat alone in their holding cells through the night. None of them slept. None of them spoke for a long time. Then the youngest one broke the silence. "I cannot stop hearing what he said." Howe looked up from the floor. The young man stared at the wall in front of him. "If I enjoyed hurting people, I would become exactly what I came here to stop." He shook his head slowly. "I have never met someone stronger than me who refused to prove it." Howe said nothing. But for the first time in many years, what he felt sitting in that cell was not fear of what was coming. It was shame for what he had already done. 3 weeks later, the courtroom was full. Journalists filled every available seat. Many people expected Bruce Lee to stand before the judge and demand the harshest possible sentence for the men who had attacked a defenseless woman and child in the rain. Instead, when the judge asked if he wished to make a statement, Bruce Lee quietly stood. The courtroom went completely still. He looked at the judge first, then at the 3 defendants, then at Lin May and Little May sitting together near the front. "I believe every crime deserves justice." He paused. "But justice without the possibility of change creates nothing except more broken people." Everyone in the room listened without moving. "I am not asking this court to excuse what these men did. I am asking this court to make sure they never become these men again." Bruce Lee continued, "If prison teaches them nothing, then another frightened child will someday run through another street in this city, looking for another stranger to help her. The courtroom remained completely still. The judge nodded slowly. The sentence that followed included prison time, mandatory counseling, community service, and a requirement to work directly with victims of violent crime after their release. Justice with responsibility. Chapter 12. Months passed. Bruce Lee returned to filming, to training, to interviews, to his family. Life moved forward the way it always does. He never mentioned the incident publicly. Whenever a reporter brought it up, he smiled and said simply, "It was one evening, nothing more." But for May, it was everything. Years later, she stood at the front of a classroom as a young school teacher. On the first day of every new school year, she told her students a story, not about martial arts, not about movies, not about famous people, about courage. She would hold up the small wooden dragon Bruce Lee had given her in that hospital room all those years ago. Every student would lean forward without being asked to. Then she would ask them one question. "If someone beside you is crying for help, what will you do?" Every child answered differently, but every child remembered the question. As for how, he kept his promise. After serving his sentence, he disappeared from the streets, where he had once spread fear. Years later, people who knew him found him volunteering at a youth center on the edge of the city. He spent his evenings talking to troubled teenagers. Whenever someone asked him why he had changed, he would touch the scar on his wrist from the night Bruce Lee had taken the knife from his companion's hand. Then he would answer quietly, "I met a man who defeated me without hating me." Chapter 13. Bruce Lee never considered that rainy evening one of his greatest victories. There were no championship belts, no trophies, no movie cameras rolling, no applause from a crowd, only a frightened child, a wounded mother, and one decision: the decision to stand up when everyone else remained seated. Years after Bruce Lee's passing, people still argued about his speed, his strength, his philosophy, his techniques, his films. The debates never really ended. But the people who truly understood his life always came back to something quieter than any of that. A warrior is not defined by the enemies he defeats. He is defined by the people who sleep safely because he chose to act. Some victories are measured in titles. Some are measured in history. But the greatest victories are measured in lives that continue because one person refused to look away. Somewhere on a quiet shelf, inside May's home, a small wooden dragon still rests beside an old family photograph. The photograph shows a rainy Hong Kong alley, a little girl, and a man in a black shirt standing between the two of them and everything that wanted to harm them. Whenever someone visits and notices the little dragon and asks about it, May picks it up, holds it for a moment, and smiles. One rainy night, a stranger taught an entire city something that no school ever teaches, and no belt ever proves. She sets it back down carefully. The strongest hands are not the ones that strike first. She looks at the photograph one more time. They are the ones that rise first to protect the people who cannot protect themselves.